Hi, I'm Brad Jarvis. In 1994, a comet slammed into Jupiter and radically changed my view of the world. For 2 years, I had been adjusting to life without my father and being able to serve the purpose we shared during the previous decade, creating tools that could help children develop their natural talents for exploration and be able to teach themselves everything they needed to know. My new personal purpose was crystallizing out of a predilection for identifying, questioning, and testing assumptions that had found expression in jobs as a test engineer as well as work with my father, and was becoming focused on exploring the big picture implications of the results. The common impact and the subsequent research based on my knowledge of physics and long-time interest in astronomy led me to conclude that humanity's lifetime as a species is ultimately limited by accidents of nature and what we can do to avoid them. As individuals, our values are tied intimately to that lifetime, because when humanity is gone, the values will be too, and prematurely ending it can be reasonably defined as the ultimate wrong. I spent the next 16 years studying the consequences of that insight, with a lot of attention on finding what influences how long we can survive as a species and how many people there can be. An early result became a published report and presentation on the settlement of space, which is summarized by a simple diagram that shows the most significant contributors and limits to our long-term survival. The most urgent threat isn't a comet or asteroid impact, it's a reduction of the amount of critical resources needed by us and other life that provides them. Put another way, we're driving other species extinct, and ourselves with them. Practicing a value system that survives the longest requires that we stop doing that and do our best to save what's left. My search for new ways to look at the world has been accompanied by learning how to express them. This has taken the form of writing essays, fiction, and poetry, as well as drawing and creating music. Most of the essays are posted in my Idea Explorer blog, chronicling my research and its implications along with other ideas that present my personal perspective. My first novel, Lights Out, is based on a short story I wrote in order to encapsulate some of the lessons learned in my study of how a population can collapse. The story became part of the novel and uses the plot device of an electromagnetic pulse to trigger the decline, since people depend on technology that would be damaged in order to get, process, and deliver resources they need. For fun, I created a digital soundtrack for the novel as if it was a movie, having discovered that with a computer I could best share the tunes in my head that I had so far only reliably been able to hum. Some success with Lights Out raised the prospect that I might someday be able to make enough money to survive with my own projects, so I continued self-publishing both writing and music in my spare time when I wasn't looking for work, or working as either a technical writer or a test engineer. Meanwhile, all of my efforts to project the future and test them using public data and news continued to show that extinction was imminent if radical action wasn't taken to stop growth in our depletion of the quantity and quality of resources consumed by life. I compiled an anthology of my writing using the name of a poem that was popular with other writers who reviewed my work, and published Death Stopper's Anthology as a benchmark for both my writing and my research. Its accompanying soundtrack demonstrates the evolution of my music as well. Deepening despair about the future prompted me to write fictional news stories about alternative universes that had found solutions to problems I was seeing. I wrote a short story as part of that Universe X series, which became a popular free ebook. I doubled down on my research, hoping I could find ways to make a healthy world a reality before it was too late. To help maintain my sanity, I also worked on new fiction, consciously connecting it to the Universe X concept in my other writing. Lights Out had ended with the first chapter of a sequel called Visitors that I intended to write, but after several failed drafts, I decided to first write a prequel called Biome, based on my insights since then and tied to Universe X. I had a major breakthrough that enabled me to mathematically simulate several aspects of what a world might look like, both in the future and in the past, and create a theoretical structure that could explain them. The resolution of the simulations got as close as ever to my ultimate goal of connecting values, actions, and consequences from the scale of individuals to our entire species and the extension of its future for as long as possible. When I had enough done that I felt it would require full time to finish and publish the results, I quit my job and began to put it all together. The promise at the end of a poem I had written earlier provided additional incentive to take this drastic step. A common process in industry is to plan, design, and test products, including documents, by relating their requirements to the experiences of those who use them in what are called use cases. Because the historical data rather than user needs was driving the design of my simulations, the closest I came to developing use cases was comparing my results to historical events and imagining some of the consequences in my fiction. I decided to define users of my simulations as people in the worlds they described, since a real-world user would likely be someone living in a life defined by one of them. I created an optimistic simulation that would successfully deal with the threat of extinction, and wrote a set of blog posts in the spirit of Universe X called Simulated News, from the perspective of a user like me. My avatar, a blogger named Will Jackson, started out reporting about an international declaration of emergency and its aftermath, and then became personally involved in the creation and test of a strategy to deal with it. Each post is followed by a reality check section that briefly describes the underlying logic and assumptions behind the events in the main post, including data from the simulation and relevant comparisons with the real world. Several major insights evolved from this use case, which I incorporated into the design of the simulations and fed back into Will's experiences and those of other users he interacted with. To succeed in meeting their goal of delaying human extinction for as long as possible, my users needed new technologies whose functionality and characteristics I imagined as placeholders for real ones. One of those technologies was an artificial intelligence that could help manage the vast complexity of changes necessary to avoid painful collapse. Others formed the basis of environmental adaptation incorporated into the main strategy. I also envisioned technologies to deal with such crucial problems as pollution cleanup and recycling of limited resources. Because consumers of my writing and research include people who want both a definition of the problems we face and a spectrum of possible solutions, I decided to provide a way of connecting the use cases of all of the simulations I might explore. The fictional worlds I had already created offered an elegant solution. Make identical copies of one user in each simulation. Each copy is capable of perceiving some of the experiences of the others. With some shared technology, they would help each other and others learn how to avoid catastrophe, just as I want to use lessons from each simulation to help us. As interesting, fulfilling, and promising as my efforts are, I, like you, live in a world where changes needed to reduce the risk of global extinction are increasingly unlikely. My research offers intriguing and plausible explanations, such as the pursuit of happiness by a rich and profligate minority that is driving the majority toward destitution and death. In a world near the limits of human habitability due to large-scale human habitation, change is inevitable. It will either be under our control or not. I remain committed to help create the longest and best possible path for humanity and the community of life it depends on and is part of, and collaborating with everyone who shares that commitment.